sometimes parents, we just fail at advice. I remember my mom when I was a kid. She used to give me good advice too late. Think about it. Good advice too late. Like when I was a kid, I hit my head on the corner of the table. Careful! Imagine kids not whining. No screaming fits or squeals when they don't get the toy they want in their Happy Meals. Imagine all the parents burning down Chuck E. Cheese. God gave me this song. Boys, they just make up games like they want to hurt themselves. They do. I'm like out in the backyard one time, my son comes out, "Hey, Dad, throw that brick at me and see if I can get out of the way." Yeah. Game, it's called Dodge Brick. It's great. Fling one right at my head, and don't tell me when you throw it. I'll try to listen for the whiz. Don't you judge me. Because it wasn't until that brick left my hand I was thinking, this is probably not a good idea. Whoa! Careful! Yeah.
I love kids. At Radiant, we have a saying. We say kids are a big deal, and I think they are a big deal. I love hanging around kids because kids make me feel young. They remind us of what it means to be young, and we just love that around here. Got 3 kids of my own. I've got an 18-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And what's interesting, because in this yearbook series we're in, we're always playing this game of, most likely to blank. And I'm serious. For me, growing up, it's in my yearbook, most likely not to have children. That was seriously the thing that I was voted for. And so there's hope for everybody, man. And part of it's because he mentioned Chuck E. Cheese. My first job in life, I'm embarrassed to say, was at Chuck E. Cheese, and I was the rat, man. I had to wear that costume. It was like 140 degrees inside that thing and smelled like the last person using it. It was terrible. And kids would pull on my tail, and they'd grab you and everything. And I think by the end of that job, I was just kind of done with kids, but it's an amazing story of how God can transform you and soften your heart along the way. Now, I think we can all say, for those who have kids, but this isn't just for people who have kids. Maybe you're going to have kids later, but you might be an aunt, you might be an uncle, you're maybe grandparents, whoever you may be. We all know that sometimes kids do have a tendency to sort of push your buttons. You know what I mean? They can take you to your limits of insanity. They can take you to the edge of your patience, or perhaps I'm the only house that's that way, right? Yeah, liars. You know that's not true. I mean, kids can do that. And that's at those moments that we're really pushed to understand what we are as parents and what we believe, why we believe it. And we stick to those foundations at that time. But still, I just could not imagine life without kids in my life. And so we're going to talk a little bit about parenting today. We're going to look at another one of those characters in the Bible, as we've been exploring some of those big characters of the Bible, and look a little bit at his life. And his name is Samuel. And Samuel is an amazing guy who did some great things for the Lord. But what we're going to find out in our story today of what we're talking about is he's actually not even the hero in this story. The real hero in this story is going to be Samuel's mom. Samuel's mom, his name is Hannah, and we're going to find out some things about her and her parenting style that I think is an important reminder for us today. So Sam's mom, his name's Hannah, and as the story opens up, there's something we need to know about her. Hannah's barren. She has not been able to have children. This has been going on for quite some time. And this is in a culture and in a time when that was seen as you were cursed by God. If you weren't able to have kids, you were ostracized by your family, by your community. For whatever reason, maybe God was mad at you. And Hannah had to live with this guilt and this despair her whole life. To make matters worse, the people around her, friends, family, were all discouraging her as well, even mocking her at times because she couldn't have children. So you can imagine for Hannah, this was just a difficult thing she's walking through. Well, that's how we pick up the story today. And as we open up in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 10, we just see it says this. It says, "In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, 'Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life.'" And that's going to be an important passage for us to remember. I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. It's at this point we're introduced to a second important character in the story. And this character's name is Eli. Eli is a priest of the church there that she's in praying at. And when Eli sees her, he sees that she's in great despair. She's weeping almost uncontrollably at this point. She's kind of muttering her prayer out. You know, it's in her heart, but she just kind of can't get the words out as well. This woman is truly distraught. But Eli thinks she's drunk. And Eli's looking at her, and at one point he's like, "Hey, why are you drunk and praying to God?" And she assures him, no, I'm not drunk. I'm praying to God. And she tells him the story, how she wants a child, and she's praying with God for this child. And it's at that point then Eli prays for her and blesses her and sends her on his way. It's also a great reminder for us to not judge a book by its cover sometimes as well too. And he sends her on his way. And come to find out, a relatively short time after that, Hannah's pregnant. She ends up having a child, and that child is Samuel. As the story goes, it says that she weaned him. Now, it doesn't say exactly how much time that is, but our best guesses would be that would be somewhere between 2 and 4 years old during this times. But after she had weaned the child, she then now returns back to Eli, the priest. And that's where we pick up the story again in verse 26, where she's now with Eli the priest, and she says, "Pardon, my Lord. As surely as you live, I'm the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." Of which I want to take a step back and say, time out for a second. Let's just review what happened here in case this hasn't settled in. Hannah couldn't have children. She went and prayed to God for children and made a promise. God answered that prayer, gave her a child, and after she weaned the child, she's now coming back to the priest and saying, here's my kid. Which gets to the big question, how many of you moms would have done that? Interesting, huh? How many of your friends, what people do you know would, after they wean their child, go down to the local church and say, "Here you go"? And please don't get any ideas either in this process. I mean, this is a crazy story when we think about it, but that's exactly what Hannah did. And by the way, she didn't just give it to anybody, she gave it to Eli. And here's what we know about Eli the priest. It says in 1 Samuel 2:12 about Eli the priest, it says, Eli's sons were scoundrels. That's not a nice thing to say. Eli's sons were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord. So guess what? Eli didn't parent his children all that well, it would appear, and God would eventually hold Eli accountable for this. So not only is she handing off her child to really what is a stranger, someone who had just happened to pray and bless her, she's handing it off to someone whose kids are called scoundrels in the Bible. How excited are you now to hand your kid off to this person? It's crazy what's going on in this story. So we're going to talk a little bit today about parenting. Talk a little bit about some parenting styles, maybe just to kind of build a foundation on it. And then we've got something else we're building up to as well, an important question we need to ask. Before we get to that question, though, let's just talk about various parenting styles for a minute to set the stage, because there's a lot of talk out there about parenting styles and so forth. There's even buzzwords we hear out there. Sometimes you hear helicopter parenting. Sometimes you'll hear about attachment parenting. You might hear free-range parenting. Those are all words that we hear out there, whether it's in the news, magazines, whatever it can be. When you go talk to psychiatrists or psychologists, or you talk to family therapy specialists, there's really about 3 to 4 different types of parenting that they address or they talk about when they're thinking about parenting. And I want to look at 4 of those today. And they're going to be your first fill-ins for the day, so I encourage you to follow along, and there's room to take notes. These are available online, too, for you to look at as well. But these are 4 common parenting types that are often looked at by specialists. And I kind of want to just ask a question, whether that's you as a parent saying, which one of these most fits my parenting style? Maybe you're someone that is in between, and maybe future you may have kids, but you're thinking, how was I parented growing up? Which one of these best fits how my parents grew me? And what is that going to mean about the future when I have kids on that? Grandparents, you can look at this and kind of evaluate as well. This applies to everyone. The first parenting style we look at that can be a common one is the authoritarian parenting style. And just as the name kind of implies, an authoritarian parenting has a little bit of a my way or the highway approach to parenting. The parent can be just a very authoritative, as the name implies. In other words, I am wiser, I am older, I am more learned than you are, therefore I know more, and because I know more, you just need to do what I know. This is a common style a lot of times, and the mantra that goes with this style that we'll hear often from parents is, you need to do this because anyone know? Yeah. Do it because I said so is sort of the mantra of the authoritarian style of parenting. Now, there's some downsides to the authoritarian side to parenting because a lot of the decisions are made for them, because the parent can be overbearing, very top-down heavy in their approach with the child. The child can be raised both timid but also with an inability to critically think. In other words, they have a difficult time making decisions because their decisions have been made for them their entire life. They haven't had to. And so in adulthood, this can be a struggle for them. We also notice that sometimes they can have a tendency to lie a little bit more, and the reason why is their parents were so strict, they were so overbearing that they learned to just avoid punishment. They learned to avoid talking to their parents, and they would often lie to try to just get out of something or to try to avoid having to deal with the conversation. So that's the authoritarian style. The next is what we call the authoritative style. And now these are parents who approach it in a more gentle way, but what's interesting is they still hold very firm to boundaries, healthy boundaries in particular, and rules. They understand that in this house, in your life, you need rules, you need boundaries, you may even need structure, may even need some level of routine, and they understand there's a need for that, but rather than top-down heavy imposing that, they try to enter into a dialogue with the child to say, listen, here's why we have those rules, here's why we do these things, here's even maybe why you're in trouble right now, and we're having to work through this. They try to engage the child and explain the reasons for these boundaries and rules in their lives. Basically, they try to take their child's feelings into account, but they still hold the line. Hey, boundaries are necessary, rules are necessary in this. Now, I was trying to think what would be a funny way or a good way to try to kind of show these two different styles playing off of each other, this authoritarian versus authoritative. And when I was doing that, I was reminded, unfortunately, of an episode from the show, That 70s Show. And not that I ever watched that, but I was reminded of an episode from that, and it was kind of funny. So I want you to watch this with me and see if, while you're watching it, which one has the authoritative style and which one is kind of more authoritative or authoritarian in this, and we'll come back in a second. Go ahead.
I don't like how you're treating the children.
Look, Kitty, I'm not going to let our kids go down the wrong path. But if you have a better idea, I'm all ears.
Okay, maybe you could be a little less strict and a little more loving.
Okay, Kitty, enough with the sarcasm.
Oh, no, honey.
Yep, he thought he could sneak out.
So, what now, Ho Chi Minh?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Playtime is over. Your friends are no longer allowed in the house.
Wait, what?
No, we'll talk about it in the morning.
Fine. We'll talk about it in the morning. We'll talk about how your friends are no longer allowed in the house.
You know, I have an interesting idea. Why don't we not punish him? Why don't we try a little of that forgiveness that Jesus was always talking about?
No. This is for his own good. Look, in order for Eric to be a happy, well-adjusted adult, he has to be miserable now. That's just good parenting. If I was to be Mr. Nice Guy now, do you know what would happen to Eric in a few years? Do you? Oh, Eric! Breakfast!
Oh, there's my sweet little baby boy.
Why didn't I discipline you?
Shut up and eat your cornflakes.
That's what. Never surrender, Kitty. Never retreat. We're winning. The fact that Eric was desperate enough to climb out his window shows that everything is working. You hear that?
I don't hear anything.
That's right. Nothing. That's the sound of discipline.
No, that's the sound of jail. This house used to be fun until you made it miserable.
Well, I'm sorry, Kitty, but I think it's working.
Oh, you do?
Yes, I do.
Oh, you do.
I just said I did.
Red,
Hell's bells!
If you didn't quite pick up on it, Red might lean a bit towards the authoritarian side on this whole thing. What are some other parenting styles? One is permissive. A permissive parent believes the child learns best by little or no interference from the parents. They just need to learn by doing in life. And oftentimes what we see with permissive parents is they kind of take the friend approach to parenting. I'm going to be my child's best friend, and I'm not really going to hold to any boundaries or to any rules. I want my child to feel free to tell me anything at any time that they want to, and know that I'm just going to be their friend and walk through that with them. I don't want to frustrate them. That's a common style that we see as well today. The downside is what experts have noticed is that on this one, that kids tend to do a little bad academically, and they struggle when they go into the workforce a little bit because they have not been taught any structure, they've not been taught any authoritarian roles, and oftentimes when they get into those moments of being, hey, I've got a boss for the first time, or I really do need to do what this professor says in college, they can struggle at times like that with authoritarian roles in their lives, and so this can be a problem. The next one that parents we see oftentimes is uninvolved, and essentially on this one is even different than permissive in the sense that uninvolved parents are really absentee parents for the most part. They're not involved in their kids' lives at all. They have little knowledge of what's going on in their kids' lives, nor do they really pour into them any structure, any rules, anything that would be helpful to them. They just kind of let them run free and do whatever they want. And as you can imagine, there are problems that kids have oftentimes that come out of homes that have an uninvolved parent in them. They also tend to do poorly in school, but they also tend to struggle with self-esteem issues because they didn't experience the love and nurturing that they needed in the home. They often deal with loneliness, depression, even some codependency tends to creep into situations like that. And so those are four common types when you go talk to psychologists that they evaluate parenting by. And most people, for the most part, aren't just ever any one. They're kind of a mixture of one or two of those oftentimes. Or what you'll notice in a home too is if there's two parents in the home, one maybe leans towards one particular style, another parent can lean towards another style, kind of like we saw in the video there. And then some of these other ones that you've been hearing about, like helicopter parenting, free-range parenting, and so forth, are often a mixture of a couple of different styles. Helicopter parenting can often have a very strong authoritative parent, but also some very controlling behaviors added on top of it. And then you can get into something like free-range parenting that can be more of a permissive style of parenting, but if the parent isn't careful, it can move into being an uninvolved parent in that. And so there's a tension there they have to ride in each of those. So that just gives you a setup a little bit of just some parenting styles, and I encourage you, maybe think about that throughout the week. Which one of these do I lean towards? Which one of these maybe does my spouse or someone else in our lives lean towards, and what does that mean in our lives? But that's not even the main point. That's just building a framework for where I really want to get to today. Where I really want to get to and what we learn in this story about Hannah, which is Samuel's mother, is this. Our relationship with our children should never, ever top our relationship with God. This is going to be an important statement we say several times today. Our relationship with our children should never, ever top our relationship with God. And Samuel's mother knew this, and that's why after she had made this promise to God, as difficult as it must have been, she fulfilled the promise because she believed that my relationship with God and being obedient to God and trusting in God is more important than my wants, needs, and desires in this situation. And she was able to take Samuel to the priest Eli and to say, here, I'm giving him to the Lord as I promised. But the question we have to ask ourselves in lives, and it's a difficult question that we're hearing more and more people ask each other, is this: what happens when our relationship with our children does become more important than our relationship with God? What happens when we elevate our family? What happens when we elevate our children above our desire to serve, trust, and be obedient to God? And the biblical answer to that is there's a word in Scripture for this type of behavior, and the word is idol. The Bible says that they are an idol at that point, but we need to take a step back from it and say, well, what's an idol then? Not everybody maybe has the same definition of an idol, and the reality is a lot of times when we think of an idol, we think more of a carved wooden or stone block that people bow down to and worship, and that's absolutely true. But the Bible builds even further on what idols are. In fact, we can see something like that in Colossians 3:5, where Paul said this. He said, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. And what is it? Which is idolatry. What Paul is saying is, yes, bowing down to carved images of stone and wood, that is idolatry. But idolatry is more than that. In fact, idolatry is anything that gets in the way of your devoted worship of God. Anything that tops God in your life. Anything that causes you not to be obedient to God or distracts you from worshiping God. Anything like that can be an idol. So idols aren't always just physical things. Sometimes idols can be money. Sometimes idols can be success. Sometimes idols can be sex. And yes, as we're talking about today, as difficult as this is to say for some parents, your kids can be an idol if you're not careful in your life. And we have to watch that. Kids can be an idol in our lives, and we have to be very, very careful. And that's difficult in our society today, to say something like that. That can make you uncomfortable, perhaps, because we live in a society that typically says family first. That's kind of the mantra of our society, family first. You'll hear other things like blood is thicker than water. Or if you ever watch The Godfather, or even better, Shark Tales, great movie on that, you'll see, he says in there, he says, you never take sides against the family, ever. Never take sides against the family. And so this idea that family is above all things, that family first, is built into our culture. It's built into our understanding. But the Bible has a warning. Listen, if you allow this thing to be elevated above your devoted worship of God, if it gets in the way of your relationship with God, it may be an idol. And you got to be careful. Kids can be an idol too. And so what I want to look at today is six warning signs, 6 ways that maybe we can know that kids could possibly be an idol in our life, or 6 things to keep an eye on just in case that could get in the way of our devoted worship of God. The first one of those 6 that I want to look at today is this: your schedule is full of activities, in particular kids' activities in your life. Your schedule is full of activities. And there's a fear to this. I've talked to enough parents. I struggle with it in our own lives. And by the way, I don't profess to be the best teacher on parenting in the world. I'm learning just like you. But I've seen some things and some behaviors that sometimes I've had a negative effect, and this is one of them. You just pack your schedule full of things, and what it is it's often rooted in a fear that says, my kid needs to be smarter, my kid needs to be better at athletics, I need to do whatever I can for my kid so that they're the best. I need to give them every opportunity they can to be well-rounded, and we just need to pack our schedule full of stuff for them to help them be what they can be. And the problem is we end up sacrificing everything in our lives for our kids. Just pack it full, pack the weekends full so that they have every experience possible to go on in life to be everything they need to be. But this ends up interfering oftentimes with things like our marriage, things like our friends, even church, our devotion times with God, and so forth. I'm not saying activities aren't bad. My kids are in many different activities. But you got to live in that tension as when is too much, too much. And when this thing starts to pull you away from your worship of God, I would warn you, there's a possibility they're becoming idols in your life at that point. The second characteristic I've noticed is this: you focus on happiness rather than character. When parents run into this one, they have a difficult time saying no to their kid. They don't like to say no. Little Johnny messes up. And instead of saying no, we let them get away with it, even though we know it's wrong, even though we know we should. They don't want to have their child be unhappy or to cry or to throw a fit, whatever it may be. And the reality is when we avoid disciplining or saying no, we might get some immediate satisfaction. We might be able to avoid that crying. We may be able to avoid an unhappy child, because children don't love to be disciplined. Nobody loves to be disciplined. And if we fail to do it, hey, in this moment, we may avoid the unhappiness. But what we understand is this can have long-term effects on the child too. Because one thing I will tell you is I've talked to enough marriages that are breaking apart, and I've talked to enough people who are sitting in situations they wish they'd never been in to know that any unresolved business you have in childhood goes with you as an adult. You will deal with it at some point. And the problem is when we avoid being able to tell our kids no, when we choose happiness over developing and saying, no, we're going to work on your character right now because this is important, is we send them into adulthood thinking that this behavior, this thing is okay. When our primary job as adults, as parents, is to put this child into civilization as a contributing member of it, to raise them up to be their own person in it. The Bible reminds us in Proverbs 22:6. It says, start children off the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. The foundation you put into them as a child will go with them as an adult and follow them along the way. Take the time now to deal with those character issues. The next one that can be a struggle for parents, image becomes everything. The other struggle is when we start caring more about what other people see or think about us, when we start caring more about appearances and putting a mask on rather than just being transparent and authentic with God, we are moving into being our kids being idols and our family being idols on that. And so we need to be careful. It's not about impressing people. It's not about putting on appearances. We need to just be aware it's about pleasing God. It's about being who you are. Another one I've seen parents struggle with, they live vicariously through them, or they live vicariously through their children. That's a big word I picked there. What it means is you're trying to live your life through your child. You're trying to relive your childhood at that point. You see this every now and then. It's one thing to cheer your child on at their sporting event or at their musical event. It's something else entirely to try to relive your life through them. It's something else to be completely crushed when they fail. It's something else to be devastated when that happens, or to build your self-esteem on their success and what they do, rather than allowing them to live their own life, be their own person, and go where God wants them to go. When we try to live their life for them and through them, it is dangerous, and they become an idol at that point. The last one, or the second to last one, is this. We can often compromise standards for their comfort. A little different than the happiness. This is when we absolutely downright compromise on our standards in the home. Frankly, we allow them to get away with things that we know don't work. We allow them to get away with things that they shouldn't. Can I stay out late, Dad, past curfew? No, but my friends are doing it. My other friends allow them to do that. Can I wear these clothes out? They're inappropriate and they objectify you. And that's not what we do here. But what can happen sometimes is we can, and for just comfort, we can lower our standards. And this can be dangerous as well too. We do it because we don't want to aggravate the child, but I'll just encourage you, don't compromise on your standards. Hold firm to those standards while you have those children. The last thing that I notice is they end up prioritizing family over God. We've talked about this a little bit already. They end up prioritizing family over God. Your kids' desires become more important than obeying God. The reverse is true too. Your desires for the kid become more important than obeying God or trusting God or believing in God, that God may have them right where he wants them when he wants them there, that God can do this thing. But oftentimes we try to control their lives, we try to control their circumstances, rather than realizing sometimes as parents, and I get it, this is hard. I've got kids of my own. It's hard, and sometimes you just got to look and say, I know what you're doing is wrong, but I'm going to let you fail. I'm going to let you fail on this one. That can be hard as a parent to watch that. But sometimes they just have to walk through it on their own, and we can't protect them from everything. Jesus had one thing to say, and if you ever ran into some really tough words of Jesus, I mean, we always like to say Jesus is love and he forgives. I like those things. But you know, Jesus had some really tough things to say, too, sometimes. Here's one of them that he had to say. He said, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he said, anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Ouch. Ouch. Tough verse. Let me put it another way. Who do you brag about more in life, your kids or Jesus? Tough question, isn't it? Who's first in your life? Which gets us to our so what moment. I got reminded of how important it is to raise up your child even just about a week and a half ago. I got to take my son to his college orientation with hundreds of parents in a room. It was really crazy. At one point, they dismissed all of these young adults. I wanted to call them children, but they went out of their way to make sure we understood you are sending your young adult to us, and they're right. But as my child left the room, I remember the next lady that came up. It was so true, and she said it in a really nice way, but it was tough language. She goes, parents, you have 2 months to remind your child that we are not their alarm clock, that we don't cook for them, that we are not going to clean their room, and we will not be doing their laundry. You have 2 months to remind them that when they get here, they're going to have to stand on their own 2 feet. And I guess I knew that. We all know that. But, you know, it got real at that moment. As your son's leaving the room and, you know, he's off getting his schedule done. And you're thinking, he's going to be gone soon. This is crazy. Have we done a good job? Have we taught him to stand on his own 2 feet? Parents, you wrestle with that. You struggle with that. And you realize, you ask the question, what kind of habits are you teaching your child to prepare them for life? What are you doing now to get them ready? Or will they be ready to stand on their own 2 feet? I end with just a couple reminders as we go back to Eli. Remember the priest in the story? Let's sit on that. These are the ones that the Bible said they were scoundrels. Here's what God said to Eli, the priest, in 1 Samuel 3:13. He said, for I, God, told him, Eli, that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons blasphemed God. And what does it say on the end there? And he failed to restrain them. He didn't do his job as a parent. Unfortunately, in this story, it would end very badly for them. Eli would lose both of his sons on the same day to battle, and as soon as Eli heard the news, he died as well too. It ended badly for them. God had an important question just one chapter before in Samuel that we're going to look at here in a second. An important question that all of us need to look at, ask ourselves, and this is whether you're a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, maybe you're going to have children later on. Whatever it may be, this is the question right out of the Bible that God asked Eli. And that's in 1 Samuel 2:29. He said this to him, "Why do you honor your sons more than me?" Ultimately, that was the problem. Why do you honor your sons more than me? That's a tough question. It's a question we all have to wrestle with. Do you honor your sons, your daughters, your family more than we do God? Let's pray.